I'm Balul.
Hey,
Do you have a button to pause the recording?
uh, yeah, I think so.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the distribution maintainers call for November 9th. Dmytro, you have the first topic.
Yeah, so as I was working on multiple tickets that all talk about releasing Helm charts, the intermediate Helm charts, or different stages of releasing the Helm charts to the public consumption, I figured I'll ask the question of how do we feel about naming our channels? Like, we already do have the stable channel. That's where we publish everything, and there's the entire job, charts.gitlab.io, I believe I called it right. And but on top of that, there was an ask for nightly builds, and since we are on the subject, we might as well try to follow, pattern from other projects, and have the stable, nightly, unstable, like what. My take on this was, like, this unstable thing was pretty much a result of one of the tickets that was talking about releasing the intermediate Helm builds from any of the MRs so that there is an ability to consume it. We might forego it. It doesn't have to be that way, but it was easy because I was right there and the code is right in front of me. So how do people feel about those channels, and how do we want to name them, and do we want to follow through on those?
Okay, so let's break that down into separate questions. First being stable and nightly. These are common patterns. We should definitely be considering this for the use of our own Helm registry. When it comes to the naming of those, I think that's fairly straightforward. Nightly is clearly nightly builds. We do this for Omnibus. We do this for all the rest of our components. This should follow the same pattern of pull off master, pull off the versions that those would use, and have at. I think the interesting part that we have to be concerned about in that regard from the CNG is the nightly build would actually have to have whatever the nightly containers images were. Like, we'd have to actually pull the SHA and use that in some way, because otherwise you're going to pull whatever the nightly was from a week ago and then get the containers from this morning, and you're kind of like, wait, what's going on?
Yeah, that relates to my second question, really. It kind of segues into that.
Right, and we'll get back to that. But that's a concern that we have to address between stable and nightly. I don't know how exactly we can make use of unstable builds in the situation of let's publish it for every single MR, because how do we get Helm to know the difference?
The difference is going to be, okay, I can answer that one because I was doing this one in my previous job. So this is exactly what I was doing, like using the Semver and development versions. You can do it. Like, it's the unstable, its function is not to stay on the tip of the unstable branch for the end user. It's more like, okay, so we have a client or the user who asks for a fix. So we working on that fix in the branch, and we just say, oh, just grab that from the unstable repo and deploy that. And when they deploy that, because the Semver for the chart is of the form x.y.z dash something, it will be considered a pre-release to a real release. So as soon as we release the production, if, for example, that client went and deployed it, their next Helm updates are not going to pick up anything until we release that next release, and they'll just override that. So it is a possibility of using that. I don't, like, to me, it's hard to judge whether we want to go that route, but I have done it before, and this is how that works.
Okay. So a concern there is, one, never tell the customer to install a development branch from our supported stance. Never. Two, because of the way Helm handles Semver and the fact that you would have to point them at an unstable repository, if you installed GitLab, you wouldn't get GitLab unstable version. And then when they told it to do an upgrade, they wouldn't actually say GitLab unstable version. They would actually say GitLab, and then they would be transitioned to whatever the latest
Right.
release is.
Sorry, like
So that's not,
yeah, that portion, we actually had them in the same repo. You're right. You're absolutely right. We actually dumped them into the same Helm registry.
okay. So then my real concern here is how, even with Semver and the dev tags, how do we get the Helm clients to know which version to pull? Like, that's the tricky part, because we can't just use the revision number. Because if it's in an unstable, it's going to have different revision sets based on which brand it's in. So you can't use the numeric. You'd have to pull a SHA of some kind at best.
No, you actually, okay. Can you rephrase that question? Because I think I kind of followed the wrong track here.
Okay, so if we're using unstable to track MR branches, how do we differentiate the version between different branches for
We
somebody to
don't.
be testing for any point?
Just by that suffix, but the ID, the pipeline job ID or whatever, in our case. This is what I was doing because our job IDs are incremental, right? So in general, you build with the 5.4.1-123.
Okay,
That's
so
the
we have to
pipeline ID.
specify the version explicitly then.
Yeah, and then yes. Because you cannot use tag, like some Helm repos have real bad issues with the tags, with the Semver plus whatever notation, especially ACR, that's the Azure, that was not having any of it, for example.
Yeah, I think I'm good with the both, the stable, the nightly makes sense to me. The unstable, I know that was kind of the thing that was being asked for from the original issue. So it does seem like people have some at least want for that in the team a little bit. So I think we want to do that. I think there's probably, and this ties into your next comment, I think there's probably multiple steps to this. The first step is to get those in there, and they'll probably be, other than the stable ones, which will be working fine, we'll probably just be using app version master, and it'll be up to people installing them to have to reset the version to the correct image that they might actually want. And then the next iteration is likely what we have to do is probably move what triggers the builds of these up a level, particularly for the nightly into the CNG, and so that the CNG is then passing its tags.
Yeah, that would be the most appropriate solution. Yeah, and that's where that MR was heading.
Yeah, and then unstable would probably still remain on master for a while after that. There's things we can do, but we'd have to build more tooling for it to figure it out. And so it's probably, being that it's going to be, at least for now, it's mostly for us internally, and we can go and find those, those images, or just use master. I think that's probably.
Or we can try to formulate, the unstable as in, it's the unstable release of chart. We are not the platform, not the system, it's the chart specifically. It's like we're testing specifically packaging here, not the rest of it. And then the master is totally fine within that context, and we don't need to type, because it will be, while nightly is easy to, like you said, to trigger externally and try to do that this way, the unstable stuff, completely not, because it's random and it's mainly changes to the chart that may or may not be related to the changes to the underlying containers. So that would be my kind of take on it. at least for the moment.
Yeah, same here. Balu, you had a comment as well?
Yeah, I think right now production is using these charts by getting the repo and doing a local install, like Helm install and local path. If we have to dogfood the registry and if we have to provide auto deploy packages through a channel, maybe they can switch to using that and be on a standard deployment pattern. So we might want to have auto deploy on a separate channel for GitLab.com.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the sorry, there's a fly in front of me. There is a natural next iteration to this, and this kind of tacks into what Jason was talking during the demo, and that is kind of utilizing our artifacts better and passing the artifacts from one pipeline to another, and that kind of goes back into the way I've been envisioning how we're, things may need to go for us in the future, and that is clearly defining the boundaries of each pipeline and defining here's the input, there's the output. We don't recycle the source. We actually take the output of the next pipeline, deliver it to the, and just keep on going, processing it through the pipeline as defined pipeline, rather than, grabbing pieces from the middle of somewhere else. So yeah, absolutely, that would be the thought following this one, but it's out of scope for the, just the MRs in question at the moment. Okay, any other comments on this subject? Hearing none. The next one was that Jason already alluded to, the app version in published charts, and we kind of addressed that basically by talking about perhaps just triggering it from external source, and that's the way we can grab that version versus trying to guess it, because guessing it kind of turned into a bit of a nightmare when I tried to do it. And unless somebody else has any additional comments on this one, we can move on to the next one.
So just to toss this out here, why do we need to at all?
So that when again, if somebody grabs a nightly, like specifically for the nightly, if we do the nightly, somebody grabs it, they need to have access to like what was built that night, not just the master, what we do right now. So that would be one of the biggest reasons for this, since we already defined that we really do care for stable, we care for nightly, and unstable stuff can point to master. We don't mind that at all. So nightly would be the only use case remaining on the table for this.
Okay. The TLDR on that one would be the easiest thing is literally just to change one value, which is to change off whatever the master is, whatever the tag version is yeah, have the nightly pipeline from the CNG actually trigger the nightly pipeline in the charts. Because the artifact from that will have every single container version that we can go through and smack the tags. That being said, we may need to get a stable tag for that. That's clearly a nightly build so that we know, right? It's not just that we built it on master, but this is the master as of nightly on UTC date or whatever. Right, because then it would technically be possible for somebody to just try just that image set from that night, right?
Yeah.
Whether they're dealing with a new version, like maybe we find out that the charts master is fine, but something broke overnight in the CNG because of Lord knows what.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and those are useful, especially in times of regression. So we know things were working yesterday and they're not working today. It's the easiest way to compare. Just grab two charts and compare them. It's not like you can do it with git diff and stuff like that, but sometimes having the firm thing at hand helps. But I don't think it's the main driving factor here. Okay. Any other suggestions, ideas, responses to that app version management? Okay, hearing none. The next one was my observation of the Nginx vendoring that we've done, or forking Nginx the way it's done at the moment, it becomes a bit of a pain to maintain from everything that I've seen. And the easiest, okay, not the easiest, but the most natural way of dealing with this in the wild is to have the third-party tracking repo yourself and have your forks within your own repo, and then reapplying the patches, and it'll be easier to track the upstream that way than what we do right now when it's sitting within the big giant repo of the chart. So the way that code ends up being in the GitLab chart may vary. We can try to consume the ready-to-go chart, or we can just vendor it in the way it's done right now at the later stage, and that would be kind of a compromise between the two. And Jason pointed out that there was that ticket about break charts into separate repos, and that ticket does talk about the fact that we are sharing quite a few templates, and those will need to be replicated across the board. And there is an idea of using the Helm library charts. But I think as a first iteration, specifically for the Nginx, I'm not talking about any other chart. Nginx, the way we track it, would benefit. And from what I have seen, we don't rely that much on any of the templates that we provide at the top level. So it could be a fairly clean cut on splitting out the Nginx. Like, there are quite a few GitLab specific things that we add to it, but other than that, I saw that as relatively easy task of splitting it out, with the immediate benefit of us being able to track upstream closely and on a more regular basis without as much of a labor involved. So that's it.
I think it'd be awesome if we could get this done. I think the flow that might make sense is to either, like, hopefully automatically mirror from GitHub into a GitLab repo and then fork that. And then, like Jason said, just make it another entry in requirements.yaml. I know there are some top level Nginx related templates that we use. I think it should work to still make it external. We could obviously try it without having to merge anything into master. We could do that today. Just, you know, mirror it into GitLab, fork it, and then open an MR where we try to vendor it in to requirements.yaml and see if everything parses through like we would expect. Huge benefit there is, like, last time I did this Nginx upgrade is basically like rip out all the files and dump them in and make the same patches that we had documented in the past. It was very error prone and intensive, so having a true fork would be a huge benefit for sure.
Yeah, my quick glance through the, like, just as a point of reference for those who did not see what that actually entails, it's 36 files that need modification in specific locations. And I just a quick glance through that revealed that certain things you'd have to ponder on what to merge and how to merge. And because we're merging infrequently, it becomes even more difficult because the spread is so wide. If we were able to track Nginx closer, much closer, then probably the delta in the between the versions would have been smaller and would have been easier to track that. Just, again, just as an additional thought, food for thought.
My only other thought is, last time I did this, I actually, because it was going to be so much work, I actually looked into seeing if we still needed to fork based on the version we were going to jump to, and we actually still did. But it's worth noting that Jar's doing a huge upgrade to like version 1.0 of the chart now, so maybe it's flexible enough that we don't actually need to fork it. Maybe we can inject what we need into that chart now, or maybe not.
It's not there yet. I was hoping we'd be able to do the same thing of just say we can use the upstream chart, and I started going that way. Looked like it was starting to get closer and better, but then I started running into problems. So I started doing the fork, and then over the weekend I was like, oh, we could do it this way. Tried that yesterday, still a big failure. So I'm back to trying to finish up the changes to the fork chart. So
Got it.
unfortunately, it's going to be like that for quite a while until there's some fundamental changes in the Nginx chart for the
Since you have
Nginx chart.
you have it fresher in your memory looking at it now. Does it seem like we could address this by contributing those changes to the Nginx chart, or are they specific enough to us that they wouldn't be accepted?
I thought I'd gotten around it, but the biggest issue starts to become the way they handle the TCP config map. They actually, from what I could tell, don't really want you to specify your own specific config map. They want you to list in the values file what you're gonna forward for TCP. And that's the problem, is that, but in that values file, we're not to that point of knowing what the ports are. More specifically, the values file, we cannot put dynamic values in. I got around part of it for a while there, that Helm now allows you to specify things like release name and release namespace and so forth in the values file, but they don't allow truly dynamic. I mean, those are like precompiled, as you come into the Helm, those are already known precompiled pieces. So there are certain instances that I've always been like, why can't we just use those static value files or those static values? And it almost seemed to be getting there, and then I ran into a couple issues. So yeah, we're stuck back to maintain a fork, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so let's move forward with that then. Let's convert it to an epic, like you mentioned, Dmytro, and we'll split Nginx into its own issue, and then let's try it. We'll see if we can vendor it in and have it work from a fork, and if it does, we'll move forward with that. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, cool. Like I did some preliminary test work. Like I have my own repo, I can just move it into a different namespace and we can try continuing it there, or we can start anew. It doesn't really matter to me. It's just like I was looking for a proof of concept and taking a look at what can be done with it. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, this looks slightly easier than just what Mitch had to go through.
Yeah, that fork will just need a little pipeline to push it into the Helm registry in that project. But
yeah, for sure. Like there's some additional tooling needed, and we'll need to think about the stuff that I mentioned. We'll need to think about tooling for the developers. Like when somebody wants to fire it off on their own, development box, they'll need to be able to pull in the Helm chart from that separate repo.
If we do this, I would tend to say, and I'd sort of recommend that we change the name of the chart. Specifically, right now we just invert, we go from ingress Nginx to Nginx ingress. I suggest we drastically change the name, put GitLab in there so that it's not confusing to other people. Because right now, someone could be looking at a chart and say, oh, I know that chart, not real. I mean, we sort of go through and we say, this is a fork, but unless you really read through the documentation, you may look at that and immediately think, oh, that's the same chart as what's publicly available to everybody else. And I think we need to make a distinct, make it GitLab ingress Nginx or something like that. They'll also make sure that we don't get confused when we bring the chart into, or Helm brings it in.
I think it's got merits regardless of what and how we do. Like this is our chart, and we should be indicating it's our chart so that there's no confusion for ourselves, even because sometimes when it's early in the day or late in the day, you don't make distinction about the Nginx ingress or ingress Nginx.
Or just new members coming on board, working with the charts. So anyways, just my 2 thoughts.
Yeah. Thanks, Gerard. So any more comments on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that there's a little bit of complication in that we need basically both a dev mirror and a non-dev mirror because the builds actually happen on dev and aren't supposed to reference .com versus .com builds should be referencing dev. So there's a little bit of complication in there, but that just means that maybe like in the first iteration that the copy in is like a manual process rather than an automated Git submodule or Git subtree merge.
Well, even with that, it's going to be still easier than what we're doing right now.
Yeah, so just saying that the first step, might be that, and then we'd have to start, spend a little extra time to also get it into dev, and then I don't know how easy it would be even to use the subtree or the Git modules if they're changing between mirrored repos. So it might be easier, but it would still probably work. Well, actually, I'm not sure if the Helm chart repository would work either.
I think in this scenario, we'd be skipping this Git submodules, right? We would just be using requirements.yaml.
Yeah, I'm
Making
not
it
sure if we
standalone.
could change that between the mirrors either, though, could we? Like the location where it was pulling from.
You can point to a file, like if you just have two charts side by side in the same directory, you can just do the // whatever references.
So can I just step in for a second? Because we have 3 minutes to the end of this. We're getting deep into the weeds. And I'm just going to say a deep no to Git submodules, because every time those go into a repo, pain ensues. I'm speaking from many years of maintainership in distros, but all this is great, but we should probably get this async into an issue, get it recorded out and get it hashed out, like with a research spike. If we're going to do it, do it. But like, we're getting really deep in the weeds and we've got more on the agenda. We have 3 minutes left.
Yeah, that
So-
sounds good. So in the initial comment line from Dmytro, he has an issue open. So yeah, we should move the conversation there and continue it there. Being that we're at the end of the call, we can take the next couple items async unless anyone had anything they wanted to explicitly mention. But they each already have issues other than the last one. But the last one was just a FYI that if you want maintainers to engage with maintainer discussion issues prior to this meeting, one of the best ways is to drop a link to it in the distribution maintainers channel. That lets us get to it a little earlier. And that's it for me. Was there anything anyone else wanted to bring up?
Just a quick FYI that yesterday and today I'm reorganizing the build backlog based on the discoveries we made by theme. So the issue numbers and epic numbers aren't changing, but if you notice some reorganization and flattening, I'm trying to make it more discoverable now that we actually know what all a couple hundred issues are. I'm trying to flatten out the hierarchy into buckets that make more sense based on how we talk about it. So just a heads up, you'll notice that difference, and I will announce more explicitly what's happened probably later today. But just wanted to call it out in case folks are following various things.
Thanks, Robert. Was there anything else on the agenda that we missed that anyone wants to quickly talk about? If not, I think we're done. Thanks, everyone.